Hello, we are here today to talk about some of our productions. We're going to be looking back, hopefully over a little mini-series at some of the productions we've done, some of the stuff that we want to do in the future, and the various challenges and excitements that come along with doing all of that sort of thing. I'm joined today by our two creative directors from TACT. There's Bobby and Ross, of course, our director and musical director, and also I'm joined by Mr. Ashley Sharpe. We're going to be talking today about Jekyll and Hyde, who some of you remember from a few years ago. What year was Jekyll and Hyde?
2017.
2017.
Sure.
Was that an answer or a question? We're going to look back, first of all, at Jekyll and Hyde, and the reason why we've asked Ross and Bobby and Ashley to come. Ashley, of course, played both Jekyll and Hyde in the show. Ross was musical director, and Bobby, of course, was directing the show. And I guess really the first thing I want to find out from Ross and Bobby, particularly, and Ashley, perhaps from a technical perspective, because, you know, as most people will know, you deal with a lot of our technical stuff for our productions. What's the process of mounting a show? A lot of us think that, say, for example, with the shows I've been involved in, you know, Spamalot or Secret Garden and things like that, you know, we come along to the first day of rehearsal, we do the auditions, we get a part, or we get put in the ensemble, or however that works, and then we go into rehearsal, we do the show, everybody's happy, and then we cry at the end, and then it's forgotten about. But from a creative perspective, that journey starts quite a way before that first day, right? So can you kind of talk us through when we come up with the idea, how that process works, who decides on what shows we're going to do, all the way through to the end of the end of the night when we're loading the final bit of kit onto the lorry to go back to the scenery store or to come back to TACT?
Okay, so I'll start by talking about show choice, because I think that's something that's really significant. In each of our seasons, we try and make sure we've got a balanced programme. So you might have something like Jekyll and Hyde that's based on a work that already exists. So in this case, it's the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, the Robert Louis Stevenson novella, which was made into a musical in 1990. And I suppose my memories of this show date right back. It was on Broadway in 1997, but I first started working with some of the music, I think, when I was at college. But also I remember doing Facade with VIP, which is part of TACT's company. It's sort of an adult audition-only choir musical theatre company, and we did Facade with, or was it Murder? We did both. With VIP going back as far as 2005 at Dot Hill School, I think. So Aaron and Bobby, I think we would have both been.
I remember it well.
For that. Ash, were you? I don't know where you were at that point, other than being probably.
I think he was go-karting.
I was probably true. I was
Still at primary school.
Yeah, I was 10 years old.
There you are. But yeah, so and the music. This is the starting point for me, because I think, right, I know this score. This score is beautiful. In this case, it's sort of sonorous and really quite moving. And then you look and say, right, is this a story we want to work with? And in this case, it's obviously a really well-known piece. It's studied in an awful lot of secondary schools for GCSE English literature. Because it's a sort of classic example of a novella, so longer than a short story, but shorter than a novel. And in this case, knowing that it was Frank Wildhorn and Leslie Brickus that had penned the score in the book, that's a great starting point. So Wildhorn, you're talking about things like The Scarlet Pimpernel, Dracula, the musical, and Brickus, your Scrooge, which is another production we've done, Stop the World I Want to Get Off, Dr. Dolittle, Willy Wonka, the film. So, you know, this is the guy that gave you the Candyman and Pure Imagination. And in fact, if you were Chris Evans' breakfast show listeners, when he was on Studio 2, he used to play the Candyman every Friday morning, and then when that was replaced, it was Talk to the Animals. So he actually was playing a Leslie Brickle, so people might know the song Talk to the Animals, from it being played every Friday morning by Chris Evans. So you're working with creatives here that are, the real sort of pedigree, and you know that this work is going to be good. You perhaps, I've accompanied In His Eyes, that brilliant duet that Lucy and Emma sing, hundreds of times. So that's the start point, is knowing that you've got the right show. And then you've got to say, well, can we perform this? Because obviously there are licensing laws. So we then have to look, and in this case it's licensed by MTI Europe, as was Weinberger's. So we then have to apply to them to say, look, we want to stage this show in this town at this time. And they then either say yes or no to that. And obviously with Jekyll we were then given a yes. And that's when we then come to discussions about creatively how it will work. So that's when Bobby and I sort of start to talk about what is this production going to be. So then a hand to Bobby.
So for me, I think this process probably differs for everyone when they're starting to direct a piece. I try my best to not look at too much before we decide we're going to do it. Listen to it maybe a couple of times through, and then try and get straight to the text before I start to look at other productions, Broadway productions, because if not, it's very difficult to undo those things out of your head. So I will read it and then talk to the team around us about the bits I like about the show, especially with the performers. Once it's cast, I try and pull out the key themes. Every show we do, what are the key themes? And in a musical, I think they always try and distill those into a couple of key features. So in the novel, there's a lot more at play. In the musical, it's really good versus bad and love. I think that's what this show comes down to quite quick.
Now, that was one of my issues. You've just mentioned good and bad. And of course, if you're familiar with the soundtrack, then you know the song Good and Evil. And when I opened the score, when it arrived from the licensors, no Good and Evil. So it was replaced after the Broadway run. It was actually replaced with Bring On the Men, which was in the show originally when it was penned in 1990. That I think that was there then. Certainly it was there in workshops, disappeared for the Broadway production, and then was reinstated after that. Yeah, Good and Evil, definitely the theme.
It's how often that happens when we get a text that is the correct version, because sometimes you can get, there will be another Jekyll and Hyde somewhere, that there will be another couple of shows that are similar. But you've got to make sure you get the version you want. Where we open the script and go, that's nothing like the soundtrack, or that's nothing like it. But trying to track back a little bit to the what do I do creatively. Again, it's a difficult question in terms of process, but definitely go through, get the key ideas, and then start to talk to all the different people. I don't think there's a show that exists where any of the ideas on stage actually end up being mine. And I mean that in a really good way, because you'll go and you'll read the script, and then you'll talk to your assistant directors, you'll talk to Ross, you'll talk to costume, I'll go talk to my mom, I'll go talk to my dad about what he can pull through. I'll go and talk to the people who might be able to make me a set, the technicians, the theatre, because you can't, best will in the world, you can't start to put something together until you know what you're working with.
I think that was one of the main concerns with this, because when we thought about Jekyll and Hyde, that could be really bad. On stage, that could just be really cringeworthy, this sort of changing from one character to another. And yes, of course, there's an element of that happening always, but it could be naff. So we needed to make sure that we had the setup behind us, whether it was technical, or music, or direction to make sure that this came across in a way that was engaging for the audience.
Yeah, and I think whenever, and I say this in the nicest possible way, whenever we direct something in Telford, there isn't really a long history of people who live in Telford going out to the local theatres. At least I don't feel there is, compared to if you're in a town where there are a couple of playing houses.
Certainly, when you look at organisations that have been going for a long time, so places like Tadlock, so Telford District Light Operatic Players, they've got quite a long history of having a patronage, people that always go and see those shows. And I think that's true. I think there's loyalty to organisations, but I think what's absolutely true, Bobby, is because we don't have a producing house, is we don't have a general, this is everyone goes to see this show produced by this theatre, because that doesn't happen.
So a big consideration when we approach anything is we've got to make sure the audience get it. Whatever you put on stage is understood and not too complicated for people.
I guess it's a case of will audiences engage with it, right? It's if you've got an audience that's not a kind of theatre going audience in that sense, we have a core audience. I think at TACT it's our extended TACT family, so friends, parents, relatives of our members and of the people who are doing those productions. We do have a theatre going audience. I think there are people that come to our shows quite consistently who aren't necessarily.
Another thing that's true is that over the years we've picked up people that have come to see a show kind of quite randomly, then have followed the journey and have then been every show for that. So even if they weren't connected with us, they then developed a relationship with us through the production.
Exactly. So we've got our core audience in that sense. But I guess if you're if you lived in Wolverhampton or Birmingham or London, where you have access to these bigger houses with professional shows either touring or as you said, Ross, being produced in house, like the RSC, then I guess you have more exposure to it. So you're more willing to accept some of the concepts that go along with that level of theatre. I think there's also a really interesting point that you made, Bob, was a little bit earlier on, was about scope and how much can we do with these productions. Is it viable as a production? And Ross, you touched on this as well. From a technical perspective, from a costume perspective, from a casting perspective,
casting is crucial, right?
Yeah,
that really is the next bit. Once you've got the license and you've read it and you've formulated ideas and you've worked out how these things are going to connect with the audience, then it's who's going to play these roles. And that's a really enjoyable part of this journey, I hope, because it gives people an opportunity to showcase what they can do, and their talent is amazing in this area. And I'm talking both the community. There's an awful lot of adults that have done a lot of theatre, either as a hobby or they have at some stage done it professionally and then have chosen to live their adult lives in Shropshire and raise families. But also the young people are just amazing. What they're capable of is nothing short of stunning, really. So that's the next bit, is where people can showcase their abilities and we get to form a cast. And this cast was brilliant. The Jekyll and Hyde cast was fantastic. I mean, when it comes to the casting, perhaps Bobby can talk a little bit about how we do that, because really, I don't get much of a say. He sort of bulldozes his way through and makes decisions. So.
I'm not sure anybody's going to believe that that's the case. I've got a question before we move on to kind of the rehearsal process and casting into rehearsal. And again, it's kind of about scope. And it's a really tricky issue because nobody ever likes to talk about it. But financials. Now, I know, for example, when Wicked was first produced on Broadway, which must be 15 plus years ago, yeah. How do you know that? When Wicked first came to Broadway...
I know, Mr. Pryor.
Well, quite. When Wicked first came to Broadway, it cost around $17 million to stage that show. which is a phenomenal sum of money. We don't operate in that way because we can't keep a show like Jekyll and Hyde running for 6 months, for lots and lots of reasons. How do you work that out? How do you approach a show, particularly like Jekyll, which is a massive show, really, the performances, the technical aspects, and you say, okay, how can we make sure that we can do the best we can do, which is what, Bobby, you were talking about before, with all those various elements, whilst not, we don't want to do it on the cheap, obviously, and we want this production to be as good as it can be, but with that comes an intrinsic limit on the budget. And, how do you kind of have those discussions, and what goes into that? Does that affect the choice of show?
It's worth saying with complete transparency that we have the worst business model you've ever heard of. We do a fully staged musical. In this case, I can't remember how many were in the orchestra, but I've got the programme. So 12-piece orchestra. But we do it for 6 shows, or I think this was 4 shows even. And
this is 4.
It's insanity. And the other thing is that Bobby and I are the worst people to be making the decisions, because if the question that's being asked results in a creative outcome that is good, our answer will be yes. Whereas we should say, oh, no, we can't do that. No, we must, and you see examples of that all the time. And although I think all theatre that's made, is beneficial to us as a community, and I think that all theatre that offers a story for an audience to connect with is a good thing, sadly, there's an awful lot of theatre that is not very good, because it's thrown on the stage and there's not attention to detail, and there's not enough money spent on certain aspects. And we sacrifice sometimes breaking even to ensure that the piece is how we want it to be, right? So yes, I'll add in the oboe, or I'll add in the French horn, because it needs that to sound right, or to sound the way that I want it to sound in my head, and the way that I know an audience will best receive it. And Bobby will do the same with technical things, and Ruth will do the same with costume decisions. So the budgeting is really, really hard, because obviously first we have to pay for the license, we have to pay for the theatre, we have to pay for the creative team to get this on stage, we've got to pay for our rehearsal space, because obviously we've got a building that we have to maintain. Then we're talking about costume and lighting and scenery and sound and technical hire and musicians, and paying for the programmes to be printed, and paying for the advertising materials and the Facebook campaign and the pull-up banners, and you name it, and it goes on and on and on and on. And I think the danger, and by the way, this is how it absolutely should be for an audience. You should go in and you should access the piece of art. But the danger is, I think sometimes we forget what's gone in to get it to there. So it's as if it's just dropped out of the sky. And of course it hasn't. It's hours and hours and months of work. But more than that, it's an awful lot of money into it to make it work. And I remember someone saying the exact question that you asked a minute ago. Well, why does everything cost so much? And we, for a very, very long time, we kept our tickets at an incredibly low price. So I think the TACT tickets were £10 for a very long time. And there were sort of theatre managers and accountants and business people saying to us, what are you doing? These tickets are so cheap. Everywhere else they cost this. I'm like, yeah, but I want them to be affordable for families in our community. And we've done this in our hometown. This whole big adventure, this company is in Telford, where we are from, and we want it to be affordable for those communities. And I want school students to be able to afford to come, and I want people to think, well, yeah, I'm going to go and see that again because I can afford to. And sadly, the tickets aren't there anymore, because obviously 10 years later, you've got to make the necessary changes to survive. But the finance thing is huge for us. And really, as a company that started as a production company, so we do shows, that's what we do, and we've grown over the last decade. We're now very much at a school, with classes and lessons, workshops the whole time, but we're also a technical hire company, and we're also a costume hire company, and we are a solutions for schools company where we provide staff for educational settings. But let me tell you, the reason we do all that, and there are other reasons, we want to provide the education, we want to provide the services. It's a really nice thing for us to be involved with. But the reason it's necessary is to fund the shows, because the profit that is gained from everything else that we do has to then be siphoned off to make the show work.
Ashley, I think maybe we can start to bring you in on this. You've been remarkably silent through the whole thing so far, but we'll bring you through, because from your perspective as a performer,
yes,
how is that first day?
Terrifying. I think.
Yes, good.
That's a really good advert.
Yeah. It was terrifying for me because it was a very specific situation. There's such a buzz on the day. You go into a room and there's all that excitement of we're about to become a family for in this case it was about 7 weeks, I think. So you sort of are getting to know each other, but also worried about the audition. But for me, it was particularly terrifying because this was the first thing for me at TACT. I'd already been teaching. I'd been assistant musical director for a couple of shows under Ross, and a lot of the TACT students didn't really know who I was. I was just the person who stood next to Ross and sometimes said do this and do this. But in terms of whether I could transfer skills or knowledge to them, they had no idea what I could do. So this for me was time to prove that. So it's incredibly nerve-wracking, but terrifying when you walk through the door. I sort of forgot about it though, because we do a sort of more unique way of auditioning, don't we? We workshop everyone, which sort of means that you're in it together because everyone's in the same room, everyone's doing the exact same thing for those parts.
Yeah, we don't do any closed auditions.
Yeah.
So we don't say, here's the material you're going to do,
Yeah.
and you decide what you're going to do, and then you come through into a room and you sing it to this panel, this table of people, and no one ever hears it. We do the whole thing very open, so everyone hears everyone else. And I say, well, just try that. Or Bobby will say, just try that for us again, or do this. That's what Ashley's describing.
Yeah, and that's when it's sort of I did anyway, because like I said, I was quite nervous. But then you sort of that fades away when, it's a more relaxed and more off the cuff. So you just have to. The only thing you can do is just trust in yourself and trust in the people that are auditioning you. Like Bobby and Ross will always help you. They'll say a pointer, for example, that they might see in you that they just want to coax out. So yeah, terrifying but good, great.
I think it's an interesting one, isn't it? I mean, we're not talking about Spamalot, and perhaps that'll be for another day. But when I came back for Spamalot, I'd been away for a while, and came back to TACT and rejoined, and Spamalot was kind of my first kind of reappearance, really. But actually, what I felt on that first day was kind of this wonderful sense of camaraderie and friendship and kind of family. And we always talk about the TACT family. That's always been a thing right from day one. And that sense of yes, there's competition, but there's competition in the community. It's not this isn't a cutthroat thing, which a lot of people see the theatre industry as, and in some ways it is. But actually, as an ex-professional, there is so much community in the theatre world, more than there is competition. Yes, you compete for the job, but realistically, that's as much as that competition ever goes. And I think that's one of the things that I've loved about TACT, and with other companies that I've been involved with throughout my, pre-training, training, and then into my professional life as well. You don't get that.
What you're saying there is right. Those aren't necessarily the reasons originally we chose to do it like that. There are two reasons. The first, and this is my little bit of advice to anyone that's running an audition. If you take one person into an audition room with your panel, you've got another 30 people sitting doing nothing, potentially. bored, disengaged, and that's no way to start a process for a show. You want them to be involved in that production from the first moment.
But for those people who perhaps don't know TACT as well, or have never been involved in a show, is the auditions as we do them are for roles within the show. It's not for a membership of the company. It's not to join TACT. We don't, we have people of all of ages and stages of training and ability, and we don't say you can't come in because you didn't sing a solo in that open call or whatever. We do make decisions on casting based on those auditions, but we certainly don't make decisions on membership.
We're an open for all company, and we will always be that way, which is if you want to be involved in the show, you can be involved in the show. Obviously, Audition then decides the level to which you're involved in the show. And it's that one chance, it's that one moment to go, here it is. And I always say to them, now not do it now, and then want to say later, oh, but I can do so much more, because in that they learn about what an audition's like. They can't sort of send an email later saying, oh, but honestly, I'm really very good. Delete.
So, Bobs, how do you approach day one?
When I first started directing, I used to approach it with the show finished in my head. So I would know the kind of things I wanted, the kind of people that I wanted in those roles, and then I would look from the first minute of the audition to try and slot people into those gaps. Nowadays, I'm much more likely to wait on some creative decisions until we've decided on our cast. So I will be looking more at, during the audition day, that's when the show starts to get crafted fully in my head. So when I see people do things, or people suggest things, or people do things in a particular way, that's when I start to go, oh yeah, that would be really good at this point. That person just did this, which is perfect for that character. And that's the nice sort of organic way. But then there are some just cold, hard facts with auditions.
With Jekyll, the range is a limiting factor. In timbre, you're looking for a baritone, but in range, you need a tenor. I'm thinking of the really quite strong G's in This Is the Moment. I'm thinking about the A's in Alive, that need to be comfortable for that performance so that they're safe. So that can be I'm thinking about the cast now, right? And I'm thinking about, so Chloe Nunes played Lucy, but I've just been reviewing some footage with Bobby of Spamalot. So now all I can think of is the section of Chloe Nunes dressed in a massive inflatable cow. I'm trying to think,
but singing Lucy,
casting for Jekyll, and the fact that she sang Lucy so beautifully with Sarah Yeomans, just brilliant vocalists, both of them. But all I can think of really is Chloe in an inflatable cow. Here we had Ashley and Ben, who were able to play Jekyll. There were others, by the way, in that cast, because it was a very, very gifted cast who could have sung that role. Lots of people, in fact, but they slotted really beautifully into other roles, and it really did. I'm thinking of that scene, the Board of Governors scene, where Jekyll proposes his ideas to the Board of Governors, and I'm thinking about Ron and Barb and Joe Gregg and Ryan Sace and Jamie Graham, and of course Jack Powell, who was Simon Stride, and how perfectly they worked as a unit. But yeah, of course Jack could have sung Jekyll. Of course he could, but actually he was really quite, in moments unpleasant, in moments uncertain, in moments strong, in moments looking kind of quite pathetic, Simon Stride. So it was the right place for him to end up, actually. And that's part of the process as well. And sometimes that's hard at the beginning of the process, because the person playing the role doesn't know the role yet. They're not familiar with it. They don't. And then as it warms up and as you start to rehearse it, you get it on its feet. after that first read through and then into actual rehearsal, they start to go, right, I can really see why I'm playing this role now. Yeah, I mean, Ron and Barb in particular were so perfectly suited to their roles, and of course both really experienced performers. So the cast was really improved by their involvement, certainly. And then again, you've got singers like Sarah Yeomans, Chloe Nunes, Karen Pike, what a voice, Becky Turner, Phoebe Standley, in those two lead female roles that again were just absolutely, it fit perfectly. And the way we did the show, actually, the band were on stage, but they were at the back of the stage, and then the set were kind of all built around us. There was this absolutely classic moment. And is it Someone Like Me, or what song is it? Sarah Yeomans did the most outrageous slide up to the note. I mean, brilliant, right? Really strong belt, massive slide up to the note. But she's behind me, right? And I'm facing the orchestra. And I'm going, what is this? This is outrageous milking of the part. And then suddenly Chloe Nunes, who's double cast with Sarah, just appears in the wings just to look at my face going like this. But so moments like that, but it was absolutely, perfect. And I remember the first time that Ben sang This Is the Moment, just going, yeah, well, that's sort of spine-tinglingly good. And then obviously Ashley, with all that high voice work, particularly in a live, I remember in the rehearsal room the first time that crystal clear A just came soaring out, and it's moments like that though that are magic, because when you've been doing it for long enough, you don't need to look at the music anymore. You can look around the room. So I'm playing the chord and I'm hearing the note, but what I'm actually doing is looking at people going, and like looking at each other and like checking this out. What on earth's this? And so it's moments like that when you know that you've got the casting right. George Dormer was vile. What was that part called? Spider?
Yeah, Spider.
A horrible creature, and that was great. And another, she's a superb actress. She played Rachel Hicks. Is that her name in Bad Girls? When we did that in 2009. But Kirsty Booth came back to us for Jekyll and Hyde, and she was a real key player in the linking of the story. And yeah, again, just brilliant. And voices like Will Young and Jacob Coley, such strong performance. And of course, not long after that, Ben and Will both off to Arts Ed, and going on a sort of a different path. I remember, is it Alive when the ensemble? Did I put the ensemble in, or were they already there? But they were on the level above me. And they're singing like big R's, big kind of choral, yeah? Really,
it's a live reprise, isn't it?
High impact stuff. Yeah. And so I've got the orchestra kind of coming at me there, and I've got Liz Toney, violinist extraordinaire for all those that know Liz, playing here, and I can hear Holly on clarinet, and Ruth Hayward was on flute. So this is all coming at me here, and then I can hear the Jekyll out there, and I can hear the chorus above me. And it was just like this wall of sound moment where you go, that's amazing. That's absolutely stunning. And then, the piece finishes and you get the button on the end of the piece, that note, dum, at the end. Everything stops. And I remember there was almost this just sort of silence, because the audience, in some songs, you get to the end of the song and they're already clapping. Because they know the end of the song's there, and they, oh yes, very good. But there was like this almost breathtaking pause, and just this hiatus, this moment in time before the applause started, and I just went, yeah, that was right. By the way, there's a whole other, raft of people that were involved in this production, because the ensemble was stunning, absolutely stunning.
We've done the audition process. We've done the workshop through the day. We've sung some of the songs. We've looked at some of the scenes. We've talked about the themes in the show, Bobby, that I know you like to kind of do as part of your audition process normally as well, talking about, you know, who these characters are, what they represent, how they grow through the piece, all of that stuff to give people that indication of where you're at, or where the piece is at in terms of these characters and their development. Once you've cast it and we go into rehearsal proper, what's your approach to directing a piece?
So from my point of view, early on, it was that we were going to follow the kind of revival route, which was way more simple in terms of physical set, and the costumes were much more stylized. The whole production was much more stylized. So that's the kind of route that we went down as well. So the first thing I try and do as a director, when time allows, is to get everything that I can possibly get sorted before I have contact with the cast, as much as I can before that first rehearsal. So after auditions, once I know who we've got, what we've got, I will go and talk to the people that are going to help me build the set, which in this case was Mark Hayden, Mark Powell, and my dad. I will then go and talk to the people that are going to put the costumes together, which in this case my mom very much led on this one, and I will talk to Ross about my thoughts not with the music but with the style that I'm going down and whether that could possibly gel with what he's going to do. I remember with this one my favourite part was going to Ross, do you mind if I change around where quite a lot of the dialogue's located? And Ross was like, is it under music? And I was like, yeah, most of it, which is an absolute nightmare to try and communicate to a band, because the scores arrive and they're in a particular order and the cue lines are in. But it's things like the costume team. When I spoke to my mom, she was like, okay, well, we've already done some work on this and we've got the traditional dresses coming in, and I'd say, oh, I'm sort of going to take it down this route. And you know you're working with the right people when normally they'll just say, how will that work? And you say, well, you know, costumes wise, I was kind of thinking that I want everyone to look a bit cool and I want everyone to look from the period, but if there's something that sticks out but it's cool, keep it in, as long as it fits to the themes of the piece. That's what was important here. And then you'll say to the people who are making the set, but the rest of it, when you've got good performers, and you've just got to set the boundaries and set the parameters, and then they just go for it. So I suppose that's my process, if that makes any sense.
It's quite a facilitative role, isn't it, directing, really? And I suppose we should also say that, you know, the roles that you and Ross have particularly, and Ruth alongside that, they're not, you know, musical director and head of costume services. It's you know, you are doing the role of the producer as well. And for people who don't necessarily know, normally the producer is the person that mounts the show. Famously, it's Cameron McIntosh or Andrew Lloyd Webber for musical theatre. Fundamentally, you guys are, you are creating these productions as much as you are mounting them as a director and a musical director. And that, I guess, does that create conflict for you at times?
As you say, it's a wider team, isn't it? And Becky Hayden was the choreographer for this, and so our duty as a producer, as producers of the show, is to make sure that then Becky has what she needs to succeed as choreographer, and it's the same then for every aspect of the production. So all I would say is, in many respects, it works in our favour, but it certainly adds to the workload as you approach a show. And I often say, don't forget this week, everyone, when you're looking for the director and the musical director, you might find that they're doing something else.
Checking box office figures or building a set or, yeah.
And our favourite, of course, is when Bobby is in the show as well and still building set. And Ashley does a bit of that.
I think, first of all, Bobs, if you can take us through the production week, as it normally is. So the get in, the fit up, the tech, the dress, and going into the performances. Like we did at the beginning, talk about the sort of I was going to say character arc, then the basic journey from A to B. But then specifically with this production, Ross, you've already mentioned the graphics and the projection. Bobby, you mentioned the incredible. I remember seeing it and wondering how on earth you'd managed to create that incredible sort of bubbly light show that happened as well. So the kind of overall, this is what we do on this during this time, and then the specifics to this production.
Yeah. So a show week should work that you have a week to get in, a week to take your show, a week of previews, and then you go into performance. What we like to do is get in on the Thursday morning, build the entire set, have a technical on the Thursday evening, get back in, fix everything on the Friday, have a dress rehearsal on the Friday night, and then open the show Saturday afternoon. So that's that in a nutshell, with a band call and final rehearsals shifted earlier in the week.
Perfectly sensible.
Yeah, perfectly sensible. And the thing is that this is where it really does come down to other people. It would be totally impossible without everyone on the team, but people like Mary and my dad and my mom and Ross, everyone in the team, running around doing all of the bits that need doing, being the lead technician on the show, but also being in it.
Because, and not in a minor role, let's be honest.
Yeah, nothing happens in a show, any show that's done well, really without a technician having touched it. Because I guess we're assuming people know, but if they don't, every single light change has to be programmed ahead of time. Which, if you've got a 2.5 hour show and you can't do it ahead of time because you need to see the set and you need the lights that are in the venue. Ash, do you want to talk about what you did for the? Well, I'll say that we had 5 individual screens that wheeled around and changed location.
Yeah.
And we then had a big projector, that I think if you were going to buy it, it's something like 50-60 grand from scratch.
Outrageous.
Let's have one.
Yes, let's have one.
Put it in the studio for film nights.
But Wilker made the graphics, which I'll talk about in a second. But Ash, do you want to talk about what it takes to program that?
A lot of hair pulling. A lot of concentration. We use a software called QLab, which basically it will map every individual what's called a surface. So those screens move. So every time they're in a position, that was a specific surface, like a screen, and then again. But there was 5 of them all moving. I think in the end there was just shy of 700 instructions going on.
Just for the screens?
Just for the screens to work.
And all of those 700 have to be programmed, right?
Programmed manually, yeah. You have to, like, each and every individual file, if it was a video of Jekyll, Hyde actually it was, if it was Will's graphics, if it was backdrops, because we used it to project the scenery as well. All of those are manually inputted bit by bit to sort of build the show archive. It was mad.
Yeah.
Remembering, of course, as well that this is live theatre,
yes.
And often the people that are shifting those screens around are they're not RADA trained, having done 3 years on a technical theatre course. These are members of the cast. They're the people who are doing some of the crewing for us. You mentioned Stan, your dad, and Mark and various other people. This isn't kind of or even automation, which you get in the West End. Most, if you think about Les Mis, the famous barricade that comes down, joins together, all of that is done by computer and kind of motors and everything like that. We don't have that. So actually, you spend all that time programming 700 odd instructions into that file and importing all the different graphics and the video files for somebody then to put the screen a foot or even a few inches behind where it ought to be, and all of that work is effectively null and void because it doesn't match where it should be.
There were probably 6 or 7 different positions those screens went in different configurations, and they had to be moved by 2 cast members each. So that's 14 people moving screens at various times, but only if those 14 people are available. And then Ashley has to fade every single one when that's happening, so that you haven't got projections going on as they're moved at the right time, and then they've got to come back up at the right time with the lights and with the sound and in the right scene. And that, yeah, so
they looked amazing. So that Board of Governors scene where the person standing in front of the screen was also then projected however many feet high it was in the air, that effect was amazing.
12 foot? Were they 12 foot?
Yeah, 12 foot.
Right, that was just spectacular. The bit where is Jekyll writing in his diary and
Yes.
done a video of the text appearing on as it was being written. I loved that. Obviously, the bit where Hyde was in the walls.
Yes.
And so obviously that's something interesting to consider there, because when you've got 2 Jekylls and 2 Hydes with double cast, you then, after you've finished it, after you've had your first day of shows, you have to come in and redo all of those cues.
Yeah, I had to change the QLab file according to the Jekyll and according to the John as well, because they were pre-recorded in some aspects.
The Ben
as well.
Pearce didn't appear when Ashley Sharpe was trying to sing.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think that's another thing that people sort of take for granted, that takes a lot of time, and everything has to be created twice, videoed twice, recorded twice. I wish it was as simple as just dragging it into a computer program and pressing replace, but
So do I.
it just isn't, right?
We've already touched on it a couple of times, but we had graphics from Will. Will's worked with us for a number of shows on various different things, and he's done a lot of the incredible poster designs that we've seen over the years. He's worked on those. Incredibly talented freehand artist. What was his contribution to this? What was he asked to do? What was your kind of brief to that?
Well, like all good creatives, he had to do a pharmacy degree during the day before he
Yeah.
So sometimes Will is on site for these. I think with this show he wasn't on site.
Which show did Mel do? Spotlight.
I think Mel might have follow spotted this one, but I don't think Will was there.
She did
Was it
Phantom as well, didn't she? Or Les Mis? Because I think it was Les Mis, because I was stage managing Les Mis and Will was there and Mel was there for that.
Difficult to know whether she was doing her PhD or doing the follow spot.
It's hard
Like
to tell.
all good creatives.
But yeah, I think Will is talented enough to have a conversation with me about the kind of things I want, and then you give him a list, and he's very good at getting the vibe just from the way you talk to him.
Will's art is brilliant. His skill is brilliant. But what's amazing is the creative mind behind it. Because you'll say, well, I want this. And, I'm fussy about things. I know I don't want that. I don't want that. I don't know. I don't like that. But actually, what happens when you work with Will is you say, well, can we have this? And then what comes back, you go, wow, okay, well, that wasn't what I was thinking, but that's just so much better. Really, incredibly creative.
It's not just a nice picture you get back. He's considered what that's going to look like on the surface of what you're projecting onto, and makes you look way cleverer than you actually are. So that's nice.
Ashley, what I love Jekyll and Hyde. It's one of my all-time favourite shows. But that role, or roles, I should say, because it really is 2 very different characters, has always been something I think to be feared and revered as an actor. It's one of those roles that I think, I'd love to do that, and then go, oh no, I don't think I could. How was that for you? That kind of journey of learning the show, of developing the character, of performing that character?
Great. Nothing like I'd ever done before. Completely challenging. I usually, when I first get my book, I usually probably leave it a week or 2. I'm bad for that. Usually I'll learn it more so on the job, as it were. So when I'm rehearsing, I'll learn it better as I go. With this, there was absolutely no way about it because of the size of the role. I had to be really strict myself and dedicate specific times. And I've, through the whole process, what was really good, and it's unique, it's a bit unique to TACT. I know other companies do it as well, but the double casting really helps. When you have someone else who can keep track of your track. When you've got someone to keep track of two characters with you. So Ben was really invaluable for that, and rehearsing us together, and often we'd sing the other parts of Hyde in the confrontation, for example. It was really useful to have a separate sort of person to bounce off. The most challenging thing being combining that with the tech on the day, and having to record things, just before you go on almost. But I loved it. I really loved it. It came with its challenges, but it's the biggest, most rewarding thing I've ever done. So,
Ross, you said this right near the beginning of our conversation, and we've kind of gone full circle. TACT is not just about doing shows. That's what we love to do, and that's what the sort of kernel that the company's grown out of. But fundamentally, what we also are is an education facility. We have this amazing group of people.
It's also so rewarding to be able to, as a teacher in this situation, go through all of the productions and either be in them or not, and you create relationships, which I can't say that I've had before with other casts or even other students. You create those relationships whereby, last performance I was in a scene with you, last performance I was playing opposite you, now we can work on this in a different light and have that sort of mutual respect and understanding, and it's great to watch and bounce off everyone's energies in different capacities as well.
I think, Aaron, you what you allude to really is that it's an enormously skilled team. That in lots of different walks of life, by the way. And I don't, again, it's not being disrespectful to anyone else that does things similar, but there's an awful lot of people having a go out there, frankly. And what we don't have is any of that at TACT. So, we make sure we've got the right staff doing things in the right way. And, it's a family. Yes, there's camaraderie, but ultimately it's about the work. It's about getting it good and getting it right. And, we always say we're not very bubblegum. We don't do that stuff really. So sometimes we can come across as being a bit serious, but what that leads to is a really good product that people can be proud of. And I know in terms of Jekyll and Hyde, I'm very, very proud of what we created. Absolutely.
And I think we've had a really long discussion, which I think has been fascinating. So thank you, the three of you, for that. I think it's probably a good place to end. If this is something that people have enjoyed, please let us know, because we would love to do some more of them. We'd like to talk to other people who've been involved in the shows. We'd like to hear more from the various people involved in other elements. So if there's something particularly that you want to hear from, I know Bobby was talking to the costume team the other day about having a conversation with them, which fills them with dread, but we'll see them through. So if there is stuff that you want to hear from, if there's questions that you have that you want us to put to our creative teams or our teachers and staff, please let us know, and we will we'll do some more of this. So Ross, Bobby, Ashley, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, and
see you all.
We'll speak to you soon.